Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ace Kennedy, and I'm an International Trade Specialist in the Office of Trade. And I have with me Angelina Leite, who is the Capability Owner for the Reconciliation Team. And we're here to discuss some business as well as technical aspects of the new deployment of reconciliation in ACE. As you can see, we have our side-by-side comparison of the changes that are coming forward in ACE as far as deployment changes. Some things remain the same, as you know. Some things are changing, such as how underlying entries are flagged and how data is transmitted to CBP. And here to discuss that in more detail for the software developers on the call is Angelina Leite, and at this time I will relinquish the floor to her. And just so you know, excuse me, the webinar is being recorded and you will be able to download and listen to it at your discretion. So right now I present to you Angelina Leite.
So what I'm going to do is I will present on a few topics that I have been getting extensive emails on for questioning. So there's three things that I want to talk, or at least present, and then it will open it up to any questions within the Casera or any technical questions thereof. So one of the things I want to talk about is the loop repeat. So I'll explain how that works. I also want to talk extensively on the 50 groupings and the 90 groupings. Those are the three issues that I get the most questions on. So let's start with the loop repeat. So the way to read that is in the Casera, we have the transaction input. And in there we have, if you take a look at where it says reconciliation entry summary transaction group, it has a M, of course, that's for mandatory. And so it has the greater and then number 1. So that means that the entire group of that section could be reported or transmitted more than one time. If you go down a little further in the D1 record, we also have the greater sign and the number 1 that could be repeated numerous times. If you go down within that section, you see the D1, and it has number 4 under the loop repeat. That means only 4 D2s can be repeated, up to 4 times, excuse me. And then again, we look at the claimant grouping of the C1 could be reported more than one time. And if we look at the C2 for the address, only up to 4 C2s can be repeated. So that's how you would read the loop. Okay, so for the 50 record, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over all of the 50s, the 50 to the 55, and when it's needed, when it's not needed. So for the 50 record, which is the reconciled line identified detail, that is the HTS, country of origin, and STI combination thereof that is going to be reconciled. And it is the combination thereof that also belongs to a flag entry that is going to be reconciled, which would then be identified in the record 52, and I'll get to the 52 record. But the 50 record is any combination thereof, HTS, country of origin, and STI, that is going to be reconciled, the issue that has the flag. So for a no-change recon, so a no-change recon is only to close out flags. You will not transmit any of the duty, taxes, and fees differences, and you will not transmit any of the line item data. So in the no change, you will not have a 50 record. For an aggregate method change reconciliation for the CA1s all the way to the CA7s, this is required. Also for the entry-by-entry method reconciliation, this record is also required. So we have the no change, the change, and the FTA. So for all change recons, whether they be followed as an aggregate or an entry-by-entry, the 50 record is required. And also for FTA, the 50 record is required. For the 51 record, that is to be used if there is a second HTS within the combination thereof of the 50 record. So if you have two HTSs that belong to one line item in your flagged entry, that's where you put the second HTS is on the 51 record. You may not always have two HTSs within one line item. The 52 record is the entry summary line pointer. So that is going to be the flagged entry summary plus the line number that affects or the 50 record, so, or the identifier of the 50 record. In the 52 record, you can have up to 9,999 52 records, and 4 entry summaries identified within each record. In the 53 record, the 53 record is the change data or the reconciled data of the flagged issue of the 09. So if you flagged for classification, you'd have your 50 record that identifies the classification, country of origin, and STI that you're wanting to change, and on the 53 record is the new classification or the reconciled classification. If you flagged for value, you still have your 50 record, and then on the 53 record, you would have the reconciled value. So the 53 record is the reconciled data of the 50 record. The 54 record is if you had a second HTS that would be compared to the 51 record for that change data. Now, I want to go back a little bit to the 53 record as well, too. So the 53 record can be transmitted more than one time. So if you have a 50 record that has the HTS, country of origin, and STI, and you have to break that down 2 different ways, because let's say you flagged for value and not the entire value is being reconciled, and you want to leave some the same and some different, or if you had, let's say, a FTA, a free trade agreement. So part of the line item qualified for FTA, and you have a certificate, and it goes by parts. So you want to break it down. So the 53 record can be used multiple times. If you're flagging for STI, for a free trade agreement, you would indicate the STI indicator in the 53 record, and then you can have another 53 record that has no STI, but the value of the 50 record will have to sum up the 2 records of the 53 if you want to split it. So the 53 can be split multiple times. The 55 record is the total duties, taxes, and fees of the reconciled amounts within the 50 groupings. So it's just within the 50 groupings is the 55 duties, taxes, and fees total. So the 90 record is only to tell CBP what method of payment you're going to give, either a single transaction payment or broker statement or importer statement or what have you. So the 90 record is just to identify how the 09 entry is going to be presented with its duties, taxes, and fees. The 91 record is the total reconciled duties, taxes, and fees of the entire 09 entry. So currently today, policy is that only reportable data is required on the line item data. So which means that not all duties, taxes, and fees are being taken into consideration in the 50 groupings. In the 91 record, you're going to have the entire duties, taxes, and fees of the entire 09 entry. The reconciled amounts will be transmitted in the 91 record. So they may not be the same totals as the 55 records, because the 55 records are only the sum of the reportable change data. And on the 91 record, if you file a no change, there is no 91 record required. If you're doing aggregates and entry by entry, a 91 record is required. In the 92 record, so here is what is going to be paid to CBP. The amount that you want on the statement, if you were filing on a statement or paying on a statement, excuse me, this would be the amount that would be on there. So if you owe CBP money, if your entire 09 entry is a refund, you would transmit all zeros. If you owe CBP money, you will indicate the amount of money you would owe by class code. If it was a no change recon, so NA1 all the way to NA7, this is not allowed. If it's a change or FTA and change aggregate or entry by entry, then this record is required. So this is a brief explanation of the records that I believe have the most questions, but we can now open it up to any questions that you may have on Recon.
So the first question that came in was, will there be a grace period if we are not able to get our system program in time for the October 1st deadline? Unfortunately, there will not be a grace period because ACS will, the last day to transmit any entries through ACS will be September 30th. And as of October 1st, the only way you can transmit CBP is using ACE. So there will be no grace period.
So second question is the 21 record only for change lines or for all lines? So the 21 record, if you're doing an entry-by-entry recon, the 21 record is for all entry summaries, whether or not they have a change or not. If you're filing an entry-by-entry, that process is still the same in ACE as it is in ACS.
Okay, our next question is, where can we view the answers to the questions from the last webinar? Once those questions have been answered in their entirety, they will be posted online.
Okay, so what are we going to send in the 91 record? So again, the 91 record is the total reconciled amount, duties, taxes, and fees for the entire 09 entry. For aggregate change submission, how do we notify CBP of negative adjustments that we are not claiming refunds on? So in the Katera, you'll be able to see that there is a section where they have a refund, aggregate refund waiver. And if you check off that aggregate refund waiver, it would allow you to submit an aggregate recon, and it will allow you to submit the line item data with decreases. Some of the examples from the last webinar have the same amounts in both the 91 and 92 records. That doesn't seem correct. Okay, so the examples that we put out, we put them out to be viewed just for information purposes on how to configure the records. What records do you need for what type of reconciliation you are submitting for. If the additions are not correct, we apologize for that. So is there a statement after recon, no PSC, is this actually true, or no change on a new rule is to be accepted? So if I'm reading this right, if you're asking if there is going to be any PSCs on the underlying entries once it's been reconciled, so there is no PSC allowed for a flagged entry once the entry has been reconciled. What does in CBP reject status mean for a 92 record if the recon is initially transmitted and rejected? Is this considered CBP reject status, so the next transition should not have a 92 record even though the first transition failed? So if it's rejected, so let's say you follow your recon entry and you submit the recon entry and it gets paid. Now CBP reviews the recon and rejects it, then the reject will whole thing will be transmittable. So a total replacement of the reconciliation entry. If I didn't answer that completely, please ask it again, and I'll answer it. Can you provide example recon entries done old and new using same data? Old and new. If you're referring to ACS examples and ACE, we only put out ACE example recons. We do not have any ACS example recons out for public view. Can you provide the next one? Okay, so if you're having so we're having a difficult time getting an IR number to commit to allowing usage of bond info in CERT testing. Does CBP have a test IR number that we can use? To note, CBP does not have a test IR number to use for testing reconciliation. But if you are a software vendor or a self-filer, please email me the IR number that you want to use, that you have been using in certification or you want to use, and then I will make sure that you have an appropriate reconciliation bond writer on file in a cert to test. If you are a broker and want to test, please contact your software vendor and make sure that the programming has been completed. And if you're using an IR number that currently exists in production, they do exist currently today in ACE cert, and they have been turned on to yes for recon eligibility. All that is required is that you contact the surety company and obtain a reconciliation bond writer in ACE cert, and then you'll be able to start flagging those entries. Okay, so are the samples of the RX rejected messages available? All samples from the previous webinar are accepted. I did not have any examples that show rejection. I will try to see if I can get a few of those and then post those for all to view. I only have ones that were all accepted. And that is only because I want the examples to be out there as to how to configure all of the records. 92 is for what we need to pay to customs. So we go back to the 90 record is the record that will tell us if it's going to be statement. The 91 record is to identify all the reconciled duties, tax, and fees of the entire 09 entry. And the 92 record is what is going to be put on the statement to be paid to CBP if money is owed. And zeros if it's a total refund of the 09 entry. Will CBP be updating line item data resulting from protest submissions for entries that are subject to recon, and will the data be available to the filer via query? Okay, so the way we program the reconciliation in ACE is that all of the changes to a flag entry, whether they be via PSC, protest, or rejection and a total retransmission from the trade, will all be updated for the purposes of reconciliation up until the entry has been liquidated. CBP will not have the recon workable until all underlying entries on a given recon have gone through the entire process that is available to the trade. So it would already have gone through the PSC process, the protest process, and if it even had a reliquidation process, and so forth until it becomes workable for the CBP. We will pull all the originals, what we call original duties, tax, and fees, which are the liquidated amounts of those underlying entries for CBP purposes. They will be ACE reports specifically for recon entries in the ACE and in the ACE environment. We are working on those ACE reports currently today. How will negative aggregate waivers affect the 90 and 91 records. Okay. So the 90 record is, again, the statement. So that's just to tell us how it's going to be paid. The 91 record is the total reconciled duties, taxes, and fees. That will not come into play with the 92 record. So the 92 record is what is going to be given to CBP that will be put on a statement. So in the 92 record, you'll state zeros because there would be no refunds. In 21, whether we are going to send only change values for the entries. So in 21 is the reconciled duties, taxes, and fees of the flagged entries. And you will send the entire file, whether the underlying entry has a change or not. So if it does not have a change and you are filing a change recon on an entry by entry, you will have to give us the reconciled amounts even if they are the same as the original, where there's no change in duties, tax, and fees. We require that the trade give us the reconciled duties, tax, and fees of all flagged entries if you're filing a change entry by entry recon. Will the recon entries filed in ACS that are rejected for mismatches after October 1st be handled in the new ACE format? So we are currently right now discussing the way we are going to handle existing already filed 09 entries in ACS and how that conversion is going to be into ACE and what data will be converted. As you know, maybe 20% of the data is transmittable today in ACS, 100% of the data will be transmittable in ACE. So we'll have limited data when we convert the 09 ACE and ACS entry summaries into 09 ACE. We are in discussions on how we're going to proceed with that. Once we have a determination, we will go out to the trade and inform them on how that's going to be handled. If now we are not going to have processing ports, if a party is going to pay with a check, how do we do this? And where do we present this payment? So in the 09 ACE entry summaries, you will indicate the port that you want to submit your 09 to, and that's the port that you would submit the payment. Are we able to start testing ACE Recon now, or does our vendor need to be validated first by CBP ABI rep? So today, if the software vendors have programs and they are ready to test, we do have Recon in ACE cert today, and we are seeing test data coming through already. So if you're a broker, you want to get with your software vendor to see if they completed their programming, and then you can start testing. Again, for brokers, if you use an existing approved IR number that is currently approved in production, then you still need to obtain a reconciliation bond rider in ACE cert. You will need to go to your surety company to obtain that. Then start flagging your ACE entry summaries in ACE cert. And once your software vendor has stated that they already finished the programming and are ready to test, you need to work with them, and then you can start testing once you flag the entries, and then you can start finding your 09 entries in ACE cert. Can two software vendors use the same IR number for testing? If that is currently being used today, I have had software vendors ask me to obtain a reconciliation bond rider on a what we call a dummy IR number for ACE cert testing, and the cert is there, they can use the same one. would the reconciliation be rejected if there are two identical record 50s? So we do not have a validation in if there are two identical 50 records transmitted. But if you do transmit the 50 records for each one, it's got to remember there's a limited amount of data as a whole that can be transmitted. So you want to be able to group all the combination thereof, HTS, country of origin, and STI, in one 50 record. Okay, so reported the inability to submit flagged AE as of August 23rd. Subject still unable to start flagging. No answer yet. Importer not approved for the IR number that's there, which follows recons in ACS. So if the IR number does not have a recon bond writer and ACE cert, you will not be able to flag. But if you have that IR number and you believe that it does have a recon bond writer in the ACE cert environment, please email me. My email address is ANGELINA. Oh, there it is. It's on the screen. So email me if you believe you have an IR number that should have gotten a recon bond writer and ACE cert, and then I will take a look at that. In a 50 grouping, if I'm reading the spec right, we may have multiple 52 records to indicate that several different flag entry lines are part of the one grouping. However, we can have a single 53 record to summarize the value split changes. How does this work with the interest calculation? Assume we group together lines for entries that span a wide variety of dates. You see a single sum change, but have no way of knowing whether our interests are correct. So in today's world, in the Excel spreadsheet, the trade does those calculations, and they take the rate off the IRS that are publicized on a quarterly basis. So if you are submitting your data on a yearly basis, the calculations of the interest are done quarterly if they have changed. Sometimes they don't change, but they are posted on a quarterly basis. That manual calculation is done by the trade today. So that manual calculations will still be done by the trade today, and then those figures will be transmitted in the reconciled amounts under the interest class codes. So the calculations of the interest have not changed from ACS to A submission. So where to find the ACE Recon Cater? So the ACE Recon Cater is published or posted, on our website under the draft chapters. And it's also available for download on this presentation. Under today's presentation. If duties are due and we pay with a check, do we need to submit the paper documentation with the check to CBP? So if the 09 entry is 100% paperless at the time of submission, and you have a check that you want to walk into the port to pay, you are going to have to give the port something to know where to place that check with. So you would need to give them an entry number, if you will, and say, this check belongs to this entry number. You do not give them a full entry package of an 09. Okay, so the question is, I think they are asking if there is a pilot test in fraud. There is no pilot test in production. The only testing for reconciliation entries will be in ACE cert. Come October 1st, it'll be all production. There will be no allowable transmissions in ACS for 09 entries. If we are transmitting an entry, previously blanket, on September 25, but the arrival date of the shipment to the port is 10/1, do we manually flag the entry for Recon, or will it still be covered under the existing blanket flag because the transmitted data is on September 25th? So the flagging does not occur at the time of entry. The flagging occurs at the time of entry summary. So unless the entry summary had been transmitted prior to October 1st, then you'll have to do an entry-by-entry flagging if you're transmitting the entry summary October 1st or beyond. But if the entry summary was transmitted before October 1st, that's when the flagging occurs, then you'd be okay. It would have been flagged. So for questions, do client reps need to set up anything with the filer code profiles and ACE cert for them to test? So there is no switch for the client reps to have to turn on an importer for testing. All of that has already been done automatically. All importers in ACE cert are currently flagged to yes for reconciliation participation eligibility. The only thing that the trade has to do is obtain the reconciliation bond rider in the cert environment. If an importer already has a Recon bond rider, is there now a new requirement that the importer replace with an ACE Recon bond rider?
No. If the bond rider, this is Monica, if the bond rider is active, it should carry over. You don't have to replace it. Because the bond riders today, I believe, are captured within the e-bond system. So whatever was there previously should have come over and stored as a migration. And if your expiration isn't until another 2 years, you should still be okay with using the bond rider.
Thanks, Monica. The CBP plans to have a grace period for responding to rejects for Recon entries that are not ready to be responded by September 30th in ACS, and respond is ready for post 10/1. So we are working on that today. We're in discussions on how we're going to handle already filed 09 entries in ACS, where on or after October 1st, CBP rejects the 09, how that is going to be handled. We do know that we do have some 09 entries also that have been requested for extension from the trade, and so we are working on talking on how to handle those post 10/1 that still need time in order to obtain the correct data for transmission. So that would be an ongoing discussion, and then we'll post it to the trade once we have those decisions. Do we report MPF at the line level below or above the minimum and maximum level amounts need to be reported? So for the 21 records on an entry-by-entry recon, it's the minimum and maximum on the 21 records if you're filing a recon with an entry-by-entry. If you're filing the MPF on the 55 records, then you need to calculate that minimum and maximum as you do currently today on the Excel spreadsheet that is submitted to ACS, or to CBP versus via ACS. If an underlying entry is protested and the protest is subpoenaed by court action, the recon will be processed well before the protest can be decided. How will it be taken into information account so that the final protest decision is factored into the recon? So what we have is that when the recon is submitted for other, what we call other, 90-2 classification and value, we have validation. So the first set of validations is that the underlying entries all have to be liquidated, reliquidated, or canceled. The second validation is going to be that if the recon with the underlying entries have been flagged for two issues, as an example, value and FTA. So the second validation, once the underlying entries have all been liquidated, reliquidated, or canceled, it'll go through a second validation to see if they've been flagged for FTA. If they have been flagged for FTA, then we wait until the FTA recon has been reconciled for those flagged entries. And then once it's been reconciled, then we wait until that FTA 09 entry has been liquidated. Since we are not checking to see if there is an outstanding protest at the validation time when we make the 09 workable for the fields to look at, we did install filters, if you will, on the 09 so that the import specialist can filter to see if any of the flagged entries have been protested. And if they have been protested, they will verify whether or not the protest has been answered. Is the capability available to flag an entry after entry summary since the blanket flag will no longer be performed? So currently today, we have a courtesy to the trade where we will retroactively flag entries if there is an issue with the filer's system. In other words, if the system broke down for a day or two, or if they're having system connectivity issues, or what have you. So under rare circumstances, we approve the retroactively flagging of an entry summary. So that is also going to be available come ACE on October 1st. But again, we have we're in discussions right now as to whether or not the process to request retroactively flagging will still be on the letterhead and submitted to headquarters, or we're going to have the C centers receive those letters and then do some retroactively flagging. We will post that decision to the trade once we have that finalized. Is there any way that the importer can check to ensure that the recon bond rider has been cut over?
I would think you could query it, but what I will do is double check with John Everett, and we'll make sure as we post this webinar with the follow-up questions that information is included. If you want to send me a separate email, please feel free at monica.crockett@dhs.gov.
Am I correct in stating that besides not reporting the original value, the major change, the reporting of the reconciled line and the grouping of the HTS numbers is in the 50 to 55 records? Okay, so in ACS, in ACE, come October 1st, this filer will not transmit any original data for duties, taxes, and fees and value. CBP will populate that information based on the line number and entry summary you give us of the 52 records. So the trade will not transmit any original values, duties, taxes, or fees. So in the 55 grouping records, on the 50 record, you're only going to identify the HTS, country of origin, and STI that you want to reconcile. And in the 53 records and the 54, if you have two HTSs there, you're going to give us the reconciled amounts only. So the reconciled values or the reconciled HTS, the reconciled STI, the reconciled duties, tax, and fees. And the 55 record would be the total sum of the reconciled duties, tax, and fees of the 50 groupings.
So the next question is, so participants do not have to apply to Washington for reconciliation. After October 1st, it will no longer be necessary to submit paper applications or electronic applications to CBP headquarters, specifically to the reconciliation desk. It will all be driven by by obtaining a valid bond writer, and also by profiles in the ACE profiles being switched to yes. So there will no longer be a necessity to submit an application after October 1st.
And if I can elaborate, this is Monica. The reason for this, and I know we get a lot of questions about removing the requirement for the application. The application was to validate that you had a bond writer on file, to assign you to a particular port, and to ensure your reconcilable issue was a valid issue within the program. The system will validate your issue. You cannot file a recon for quantity, and quantity is not a recon issue. So there's no need to send paper for that. You can submit your recon summary across the nation. No need to assign you to a port. And your bond writer will be within the eBond system, which we will validate. So there was no need to go through the process of submitting a paper request to headquarters to do nothing but approve. So we wanted to eliminate that and make it as easy for you guys as we could. So that was the reason for this move in the programming.
Are we still required to send paper and CD copies of the Recon header and line item information and association file? The answer is no. So all of that has been eliminated as far as hard copies. All that information that was the four components, which was the header record, the associated file, and the duty difference if it was an entry-by-entry recon, and the Excel spreadsheet along with the CD are no longer required for hard copy submission come October 1st for the recons that are going to be filed as of October 1st that are new. So the header information will be transmittable. The associated file is transmittable along with the duty, taxes, and fees differences. And also the line item data is what replaces the Excel spreadsheet. The entry summary line pointer, record 52, replaces the CD. The CD, for the purpose of the CD, was so that if the Excel spreadsheet was too huge to submit documentation, you had it on the CD, and it was also used so that we can download information to Census Bureau. Census Bureau will be able to extract that information in the 09 and ACE as they do for any other entry type. So that replaces the CD portion of it. 50 through 51 can be multiple or single underline entry. So the question is, can a 50 through a 51 be multiple for a single underline entry? So yes. So the 50 and the 51 is the combination, again, of the HTS, country of origin, and STI of multiple line items within a flagged entry. So it's the roll-up and the combination thereof. At this point, each 55, we need to consider minimum and maximum MPF. Well, minimum and maximums are always considered, whether they were considered in the Excel spreadsheet or considered in the roll-up on the 55 record when you're reporting the MPF. Will the recon be filed at the importer CBP port only? So we have internal validations of where the recons are to be routed to be worked. But for the trade purposes, you will choose what port you want to file your recon. If the importer is assigned to a C, the importer may go to the C center because that's where the recon is going to be filed at. So if you belong to a C, your recon will be worked by that C center. Do all ACS entries flagged for recon need to be done in ACS, and all ACE entries flagged for recon need to be done in ACE? So in today's rule, so currently today, all entries that are flagged in ACS and ACE can be reconciled in ACS. Come October 1st, the flagged entries that have not yet been reconciled will have migrated into ACE. So come October 1st, all ACS or what resided in ACS as a flagged entry that had not been reconciled will be an ACE, and so then they will be all considered ACE entry summary flags that will be done with an ACE 09 entry. How can a broker know when the client has a valid Recon bond rider? Can a query be checked? Okay, so Monica is going to check on that, and we're going to answer that question as how would you know that a reconciliation bond rider is attached to a bond in ACE through a query? We'll answer that. We'll get data from John Everett, and then we'll answer that question. For paper required Recon entries, should broker be prepared to submit or upload? So again, nothing is required at the time of transmission. So in ACF, the Recon is total paper documents required, with the exception of what needs to be transmitted in ABI. In ACE, come October 1st, no hard copies of the 09 entry are to be submitted to the port. The entire 09 entry is paperless in ACE. Once the import specialist or entry specialist go through the review of the ACE Recon and they need additional supporting documentation to support the claims that you have made on the 50s records, as an example, let's say they want a cost submission or bills or so forth, they will request that through ACE. You'll get a message, and then you can upload that information through DIS. If an importer already files in a certain port, may that be changed effective October 1st? So yes, so you are not limited to the 13 processing ports. So if I was an importer and I was assigned to Otay Mesa, which is one of the reconciliation ports, I can, come October 1st, I can now file my Recon at any port I wish. If the Recon is transmitted and duty paid on ACH statement, but then rejected, now additional duties are due. When you retransmit corrected entries, do you put the statement again or pay additional duties by check? So you cannot place an 09 entry into a statement status once it has already been paid. So if an 09 comes in, it gets filed with CBP, payments are made, then after review, the CBP rejects it, you retransmit it with corrections, and now you owe money. You cannot place that entry on a statement again. You will have to pay by check, cash, money order, or what have you. Any more questions? Okay, so all of this will be posted. One more question. What? So the question is, what would be the interest in 21 segment? I'm not understanding the question. So if you're referring to the interest calculations, it's the interest. So if you have a Recon entry that is an entry by entry or an aggregate where you owe money, in this case it would be an entry by entry because you're referring to the 21 record, the interest calculations for that individual entry will have to be posted on the 21 record. Same policy as you do today in ACS. Is it still 30-day reject period for Recon? Yes, we have not changed that policy, so Recon does have a 30-day policy for rejection for resubmission. Can we retransmit various times? So in prior to CBP status, the trade will be able to retransmit the reconciliation entry numerous times. I do know that in ACS, we did have an issue where an entry was retransmitted and if it was accepted, the trade will not be able to retransmit again, even though the entry was in reject status. In ACE, you will be able to retransmit as many times once it's rejected, or even prior to the first acceptance of the first transmission. What if I transmit, get accepted, and minutes later I make changes and retransmit again? Will it be in CBP status? Okay, so the CBP status is the same throughout all entry types. So the way it works for the 01s will also work with the 09s. So if you submit your entry and it has not yet been placed in CBP control, and let's say, for an example, you put it on statement, and the print date has not yet come, so it's still in trade control, you'll be able to retransmit that. But once it becomes CBP control, that retransmission will not occur unless CBP rejects it, or until after you pay the statement. What if CBP does not complete processing protests submitted for flagged entries? Would we reconcile against the original or protested amounts, or in order to get an accepted Recon transmission? So if you protested an entry and you have not gotten a decision on the protest, so it has not yet been accepted that we agree with the protested issue, so your originals will be your liquidated amount. In 21, whether we are going to send interest, if yes, we need to send interest for that underlying entry. That is correct. So the 21 record is interest calculation per entry. There are some where there is no payment. How will we know that the accepted transmission is the final one? I'm not understanding the question, but I think that if there's no payment on an 09 entry, how would you know that it's been accepted? So they're trying to find out when does it go to CBP control. Okay, so if it is to find out when it goes to CBP control, then if it's duty-free, then that automatically becomes CBP control. Okay, any more questions? Okay, I want to thank you, and we do, like I said, have posted the CATER and the webinar in the attachments on today's presentation. And you can download the PowerPoint as well. Okay. We're getting some questions as to whether or not this presentation will be available after the fact. Yes, we'll be posting it to cbp.gov/ACE later this week, so keep an eye out for that. We'll also be posting previous presentations that you may have seen, including the Recon technical webinar that happened earlier in August. Okay, I want to thank you for participating, and if there's any more questions, you do have my email address that is posted on the presentation. Please feel free to email me. I will try to get to everybody. Please be patient. I get hundreds of emails, and I'll try to answer every single one of them. Thank you again. Goodbye.